It is an honor for me to be here today because I'm not a historian, I am not an academician, I am just a high school French teacher, that's all. And I taught French in high school all my life. But I have this particular aspect in my life, is that I actually am one of the few surviving witnesses of that period of World War II in France during the occupation. And that period of hiding Jews, which was very prominent in the area where I lived. Why on earth did I live in those remote mountains of... Ah, thank you. Do you hear me better? Yes. Okay. Why on earth did I live in France, in those very remote mountains of central France, during the war? I was 13, 14, 15, 16, so I remember quite a few things, but I was not always informed on everything that happened, because my parents always felt that it was dangerous to have a teenager too knowledgeable in case there was an arrest and in case we would be questioned, which made sense, didn't it? All right, why were my parents living in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon? You won't believe this. You won't believe this. My father was from northern France, from Saint-Quentin, a town that was invaded by the Germans repeatedly. You know, the Germans have invaded France repeatedly. As a teenager, he became very, very conscious of war and of the negative aspects of war, for the good reason that his mother was German. And his mother died when he was young, he was 10 years old. But she was German, and he had wonderful summers that he spent in Germany with his German cousins, first cousins. So he was really French-German culturally. And he couldn't believe that his older half-brothers would be fighting in the Second World War, in the First World War, against his German cousins. He said, that doesn't make any sense. I belong to both families, I love them all, and they are at each other's throat. They are supposed to kill each other. Furthermore, when Saint-Quentin was invaded during the First World War, he had this awful, awful vision of soldiers coming through, German soldiers, blind, half of the jaw torn down by weapons, miserable situation of rotten flesh. And he was 14 years old. And he thought, that doesn't make any sense. War doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, his father was an industrialist with a rather posh house in a good part of Saint-Quentin, and the whole third floor had been billeted for German soldiers. And one of those soldiers somehow started talking to my father, who was just 14. And he said, are you hungry? And Dad said, yes. He said, here is some bread. And it was dark, sticky bread, you know, bad German army bread, which was called, in German, the initials were K. And Dad said, I don't want any of your caca bread. And actually, he said, and you are a German and you are killing the French people. You are killing my older brothers. And the German said, nein, I am not killing your older brothers because I am in the army, but I don't have a weapon. He had no weapon, because I am a pacifist. A pacifist? What do you do in the army? He said, I am serving my country as a radio operator on the front lines. So I am part of the operation, but I will never kill to defend myself. And here was my then young father, totally mesmerized and impressed by this position of not killing, although there was a war. So here was my father, an old Huguenot Calvinist on one side, and Lutheran German on the other half, born in northern France. Very cultured, very sophisticated, and so forth and so on. Then he got a scholarship at Union Theological Seminary in New York City for 1 year, which was a bonus, really, because it gave him a chance to leave this conservative Calvinist background of his and to see something else. And for 1 year, he was at Union Theological Seminary. Backtrack. My mother was born and raised in Florence, Italy. She was Italian, but her immediate descendants was from the Decembrists. Now, some of you might know who the Decembrists are. If you don't, hit Google and find out tonight. It's very interesting. It is the very first movement of some kind of revolution against the Tsars in Russia. So my mother's grandfather was actually exiled with ball and chain to Irkutsk in Siberia when there was nothing there, you know. And they were in a camp, you know, and they were prisoners. So on my mother's side, you have this person who is half Italian, small nobility, very Catholic, and the other half revolutionary Decembrist. Her grandmother really raised her because she was an orphan by her mother, and so she had that vigor and interest to human causes, do the right thing, solve social problems. She was a social service all by herself. She always solved problems. And she finished her university in Florence, and she decided she would accept a scholarship at the New York School of Social Work. So here, those two people from completely different background ended up in New York. And during some Rockefeller Center, International Center outing, they met. They really got along this way and were engaged within 6 weeks. Same ideas, same independence, same courage, same detachments from conservative backgrounds, you know, broken chains with the past. Do what is right in this world. And this was really something they lived together through their life forever. They never wavered from that vision, no matter what the dangers were. Okay, so they go back to France and get married. And my father gets his first church in northern France, second church in northern France. 4 kids were born. I am the oldest. And they decided they wanted to move because the mining and industrial atmosphere of northern France was very unhealthy. And we were running low fevers, you know, and that was a time when TB was rampant. They didn't have antibiotics at the time. And so they tried to find a church. They applied to 2 churches, which accepted them 100%, voted in, but the French administration said, that dangerous trochme, and that's their word, that dangerous trochme. You guys cannot take him as a minister. He is dangerous. So there he was, member of the church, the administration refusing to give him the churches that had accepted him. So by a roundabout way, he manages to be nominated as a temporary in this village of 2,800 people in the mountains of central France. You were there, Patrick, weren't you? Patrick and Marianne were there. It is really a nothing village, to tell you the truth. So nothing that when I arrived there at age 7, I thought, where are we? You know, the presbytery was austere and poorly heated, and the village cows had to walk by my front house, my front door, in order to go and drink twice a day. And you know, traveling cows leave visiting cards. And so I spent my youth watching my feet to make sure I wouldn't step on a visiting card. And this turned out to be the nomination of the right person, you know, a pacifist, conscientious objector, in the right place, completely isolated in the mountains of central France, at the right time of history. And that is the unusual part of the whole affair. It is a fallacy to think that he was the only one and that Le Chambon-sur-Lignon was the only village. No, it was a whole area, many, many villages, 12 of them with different ministers. But we were 3,000 plus feet high, and we were naturally protected by the geography. No industry, narrow gauge railroad, which you will see on the film, no, everybody poor, the farmers scraping by, all Huguenot farmers. Huguenots, you know who they are, don't you? If you don't know what the Huguenots are, it is item number 2 to look up on Google. Okay. The Huguenots are the very first people of France who adopted the new faith, the Reformation under John Calvin, which came right after Luther in Germany. All right? So here we are in this isolated place. And the Huguenots, Katya, come and sit down. My daughter finally made it. She was trying to park on this wonderful campus. Okay, the Huguenots, those people were descendants of Huguenots, French Huguenots, who had been massacred by the French government for many, 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 many years because they were threatening the Catholic Church and the kings who were friends like this. And many Huguenots fled to Germany. They were invited in Germany. The German princes would give them land to farm because they were such serious, hardworking, honest, intelligent people. Some went to Sweden, some went to England, some went to the United States. What?
Here,
yeah, sure, here. He reminds me. In the United States. What is sad is that the ones who came to the United States settled first on the East Coast and very quickly were comfortable bourgeois. They started making money and they very quickly lost their Huguenot origins and became Presbyterians. I read a book on that. They became Presbyterians. So there is no real... There are a couple of Huguenot churches in the East, but no real tradition of Huguenots. All right, so here we are in Huguenot country. Very poor farmers, but something very special. Those farmers were literate. In the 19th century, French farmers were not literate. But the Huguenot farmers were, because they read the Bible every night around the dinner table with their children. So they were sophisticated intellectually, not in their looks, but intellectually. And when the Second World War came in and the Vichy government came in, they wouldn't believe anything that they heard on the radio. You know, they would just say that doesn't make any sense, this collaboration and so forth and so on. Okay, back to Chambon and my father. It is sure that Chambon became a center. First of all, it had the railroad. Second of all, people like my father had many international contacts. So it allowed money to be brought in through Switzerland in order to help refugees. Third of all, it was a small touristic area with lots of apartments for rent and hotels and little rooms for rent. And so all that space that was empty in the winter, because there were no tourists, terrible, terrible climate, by the way, snow like this. All these spaces were available and started being used for refugees. So it was just a natural situation. And the people started taking refugees in. Some could pay, others could not pay. They were just taken in, and you will see the film. It is quite expressive of the situation. And it turned out that there were some leaders, and my father was definitely a catalyst and a contact with the Quakers and with other organizations. the International Civil Service in Geneva, etc., etc. So he was important, but he was not the only one. Now, the film. It tells a story better than I can. Okay, the film is a sort of a one-sided film because the producer, Pierre Sauvage, whose Polish name I don't remember because it's impossible to pronounce. Pierre Sauvage, is anyone Polish here? You are? You are? I wish I had that name written down. I can't pronounce it. It's very complicated. Anyway, Pierre Sauvage was born in the village. And after years, when his parents revealed to him, he grew up in New York, by the way, went to the French lycée, is absolutely bilingual. And when he was 18, his parents said, you know, you were born in that little town in France. We want to show you where you were born. And he said, ah, okay. He said, you were born there because you are Jewish. He nearly fell over. He said, Jewish? He was raised as a nothing. And he immediately lashed on that identity of having a history, a background, a reason to study his past. And he reacted in a way that made him go back to the village and try to find out how come he was born there. So it is really his story retracing how come he was born and protected there. It is by no means the story of the whole plateau. It is just one story in many, 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 many other stories. And my parents were leaders, but they were leaders among many, 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 many other people, many ministers, by the way, who were instrumental in developing a secret network to protect refugees. That's about it. I think the film can tell it better than I can. Before we go into the question and answers, I would like to say something. People who teach the Holocaust, it's the big thing now. All these horrible concentration camps and so forth and figures, they fail to stress the fact that many, many, many Jews were hidden and protected and saved by people like you and me. People who, when presented with the challenge of a situation where it was a matter of life and death, decided they would take a chance, even if it was dangerous, and they would choose life. Also, I would like to say that what Miss Maber, Leslie Maber, the English teacher who closed the film, said, that the people of the plateau were not better than anybody else. They were just like you and me. They were average people. The thing is that when we are challenged, we are faced with a very important problem, it is up to us to decide what we are going to do. I'm thinking of even simple situations when I speak to students, and there are many students here, simple situations where you see a case of injustice, or a case of racism, or a case of bullyism. It's up to you to choose a challenge. Become the friend of the student or the person who is being bullied, and not of the other person who is bullying. Become the friend of the minority person who might be forgotten or set aside because he or she is of a different race or different origins. Try to make a bridge. Try to reach out to these people. This is the only way for our future. And of course, today we are faced with all the problem of the refugees coming in. You know, the Americans, America, the state of America, was not very generous at all during the war. They did not let in many Jews at all. They didn't want many Jews to come in. They did not encourage people to welcome Jews. Because, and that's sad to say, the American Jews who were well settled in their ways, themselves did not want foreign Jews to come in and disturb their comfortable ways. They were already established, and they didn't want to be disturbed. So there's a lot to say about that. And finally, again, I would like to stress that, remember, it is a whole area, a whole plateau, with many people who did something, and it was secret. Like Mother said, my mother, and I look just like her, when I see myself in the morning, I thought, oh gee, Mother. But when my mother said, no one knew what the others were doing. The Héritier people, the two girls, were in school with me, in elementary school, at the village school. I never even knew that they had refugees in their house. And something very interesting, when Peter Grosz, who is the author of this book, which is the last book for sale. And by the way, don't forget Patrick Henry, because he'll be able to sign his book as long as he... But Peter Grosz was visiting me in St. Paul. And I said, Peter, you're going to California. You must visit my friend Catherine. Catherine ex-Cambécédès, Colburn today, a friend of mine who married an American and spent her adult life in California. She is really very funny. She has lots of stories to tell, and you are going to love what she says. So he went, and she and Catherine just became fast friends, because Catherine is a riot, and Peter is a funny guy too. And he got stories from her about what she did during the war. She was 3 years older than I was, so she assumed responsibilities which I could not assume because I was too young. And she told him stories that I had never heard, and yet I am one of her best friends. This shows you that what people did was their private life, and they never even thought of telling about it. It was their past. It was nothing to boast about. And it is through Peter Grosz's book that I learned that Catherine was quite involved with the underground. The armed underground, because of course we had the nonviolent resistance, the weapons of the spirit, but there was also a whole branch of active underground. And that is very well described in Peter Grosz's book. All right, here we are. So now the floor is yours. You ask questions. And Patrick, come and join me. They might have questions for you.
Your stories are far more interesting than anything I have to say, Nellie.
Well, he did the historical research. I'm just a storyteller.
I want to take an opportunity. I did not know I would be standing here. This woman is 89 years of age. She has the same dynamic personality and sense of justice as her parents had. And if it weren't for Nellie, none of us could have written our books. You are witnessing a survivor of the most profound story of rescue during the entire Holocaust. There are only two places where the place has been named righteous. In Israel, they only named people righteous. And this was the first place, there were so many people that did this, that they decided to name the actual place, and you can see the stone at Yad Vashem. So what you're witnessing here is something of extraordinary historical importance. Nellie Trocmé here at Western Washington. I'll just give a... People who want to write history books can't write these books without the survivors, without the witnesses. Nellie Trocmé introduced me to the man, André Chouraqui, who knew Albert Camus when Camus was living in this village when he was writing the play. She hadn't introduced me to André Chouraqui, I never could have written that chapter. She introduced me to the family of Daniel Trocmé, and his brother sent me every letter that Daniel Trocmé wrote from the time he started working in Le Chambon until about 1 month before he walked into the gas chamber. Many of the letters written on French toilet paper that his father recopied as soon as he received them. These are documents that never would have been in my hands without Nellie. Nellie introduced me to the family of Madeleine Dreyfus. Dreyfus, as you know, is the most common Jewish name in the country. I had no idea that Jews were rescuing other Jews. I never heard about Jews rescuing Jews. This opened up an entire area, and it's important coming to the surface now in Israel, JRJ, Jews rescue Jews. We only hear about Christian rescuers. People like Madeleine, who you saw in the movie, who brought children here, they risked their lives. They were taking them on trains. They had false papers. It's a whole new story of the Holocaust. None of this would have been possible for me without Nellie. Without Nellie, no book. Nellie, I wanted to somehow say this publicly to you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
No,
No.
I would.
Listen to her story. She's the witness.
I'll tell you a funny story, though. I was at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. They had a big conference between Christians and Jews. I was not invited there, but I knew the director of the place, and I said, "Oh, I'm so interested. Would you let me come and join the, you know?" And he said, sure, you come. We'll just take you in. And Pierre Sauvage, the producer, had a presentation. And when Pierre Sauvage saw me, he said, "Oh, Nellie, you are going to come and help me present my film." I said, "Sure, why not, you know, present the film." Nothing to it. And we were talking and getting ready, and of course the microphones were not there, and the projection weren't working, and the university was all fouled up because universities usually mix up things. And I was talking to Pierre, and the auditorium was almost empty because it was early. And Pierre comes close to me and he said, "Do you know that guy there sitting near the last rows?" I said, "No, I have no idea." "His name is Patrick Henry. Do you know who that is?" "Not the faintest." He said, "Well, he is writing something on Chambon, but he doesn't know that much about it." And
Sure.
yeah, and you know, I'm sort of worrisome, people who take on stories like this and who borrow from others, what others said, others who quoted from others who quoted from others. It's like the telephone game. When it gets to the end of the line, it doesn't resemble the original story at all. Well, anyway, so I thought, So I walked up the aisle and introduced myself. I say, "Professor Henry, I am Nellie Trocmé-Hewitt." And he nearly fell over backwards. He said, "Oh, I'm just working on this thing, on this paper. Would you help me?" And you know, I was so touched that a person who is proudly working on his own paper or book would actually be so simple and so ready to accept somebody else's suggestions. I said, "Sure, I will tell you what I can." Okay, questions?
Emily, do you want to talk in the microphone? Sure.
I very much appreciate your story, but I do want to respectfully disagree with one characterization you made of American Jews' role during World War II, because though there may have been some who were not working hard to get the Jews out of Europe, I know certainly most were, and were working desperately to get FDR and the government to let people in, and using their own resources to let people in, and I think that was an unfair.
Who was the fellow in the FDR government who was so anti?
Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State.
Okay, and he did everything he could to try to prevent the arrival of Jews, and he had a lot of influence in the government. Thank you for your remark. Questions? Maya, you are mute. Okay, Sylvia, is there a blackboard where I can read things? Okay. Susan Red, my friend. See, nothing like a friend.
Thanks for coming from St. Paul, Minnesota, Nellie, and telling your story. I still learn new things each time I hear you. Would you talk about what became of your father?
Oh, is that important? I suppose. Well, my father finally left Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. You know, you get tired of the same minister and you need a change. And for 10 years, he worked for a pacifist organization called the Fellowship of Reconciliation. I don't know if you are familiar with this movement. It is something I should write on the board. I should have a board to write several things. The Fellowship of Reconciliation is one of those many pacifist movements, international movements. And my parents were European secretaries, co-secretaries. They traveled all over the world presenting ideas, organizing pacifists, reorganizing European pacifists who had been completely separated and scattered by the war. And they opened a meeting center in Versailles. It was near Paris, but also they found a crumbling old mansion, beautiful mansion, falling apart, absolutely. But they rented it for a fairly reasonable price as a conference center where people could come and stay. There were dormitories, you know, and facilities, and food was served, and they could meet groups of other people who were of different opinions or different background. It was a meeting spot to create bridges between groups. And it worked very well for about 10 years. It was a killing job because there was no money, always never any money for these groups of people. And there was quite a bit of demand. One of the very first groups that came was, believe it or not, a group from St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live. It was a group from Macalester College. Who knows about Macalester College? Okay, where Kofi Annan, by the way, graduated from and had a full-time scholarship there. And Humphrey was a graduate of Macalester College. Macalester is in a few blocks from my home. And that group organized by Dean Dupré, soon after the, you know, in the 50s, in the 60s, and he came and stayed at this center where my parents organized a program and meetings for the members of the group who were interested in reaching out to different people. I'm glad you know about Macalester.
My son graduated.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Oh, good. It's still a good school.
Yes.
The kids look a little bit sloppy and hippie, but they're very, very bright. They are very, very bright, and it's a good school. It's a very good school. Other questions? Yes.
Do you remember ever waking up one morning and finding strangers in your house?
In the Chambon?
Waking up?
I mean, in Le Chambon, did you ever wake up in the morning and find a bunch of...
Oh, no, I didn't wake up in the morning with a bunch of people there, but there were people coming all over. They stopped at our house, but they stopped in other places too. There was a hotel on the main square where they would automatically come from the railroad station down and stop at l'Hôtel Mai. There were also some people who would actually go to the arrival of the trains to see if there were refugees stranded and to take them somewhere. No, in my case, we had, my mother always took students, board and room students, because the salary of ministers was so dismal, and we were 4 kids. So she had 4 people who were paying guests. So there was 8 kids in the family, which is not a simple problem for feeding at a time of war, where food was limited. But we also had 2 other refugees who stayed for a long time. One was Monsieur Collin. Again, Sylvia, I need a board there. I mean,
Yeah, you have a board.
oh, okay. Oh, Fellowship of Reconciliation. Oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay, Monsieur Collin. That's the way I knew him. He lived in my house, mind you. Collin. Okay, but his real name, I found out after the war, was, see, Kohn. And he was a very solitary soul. He had lost his whole family in Berlin. He was alone, completely alone. And he was sort of disagreeable. But I, as a typical teenager, I didn't pay, I feel guilty today not to have paid enough attention to him, to have not been a little kinder to him, asked him about his past or his family or who he was. You know, teenagers are so self-centered. Oh, it's just when you think of it. And he was a sad character. Monsieur Collin could repair anything and make anything with nothing. And since we lived in a family without money, he could take old planks and make a desk, for instance, a fold-up desk in a room, so that there was space in the room when you had to go to bed. After the war, Monsieur Collin had no place to go. And I understand he stayed in the village. And he proposed marriage to an elementary school teacher whom I knew, who was sort of a, well, the term doesn't apply today, but at the time she was old maidish. You know, she was sort of not very sharp and not very outgoing, but probably a very good teacher. And she turned him down. And poor Monsieur Collin died in the village all alone. And he's buried there in the cemetery among people who are not his people and who, you know, he has no way he has a lost soul, a lost soul. Then we had Madame Berthe. Ah, Madame Berthe. Madame Berthe, I never knew her last name. Her last name was Grünhut. Gee, I tell you, universities don't really have it, do they? Grünhut, let's see. Ah, this one works. Okay, Grünhut, which means green hat. I didn't know her last name. She was Madame Berthe. And she did cooking for us. Mother was so busy with all sorts of projects. She taught Italian at the school. She had all these refugees dribbling in. She was a minister's wife. I mean, she was always somewhere doing something. And so Madame Berthe would do the cooking. And of course, there was very little to cook with. But on the top of that, she was a real bad cook. and so we, you know, but we didn't care. We didn't realize it was bad food. We didn't realize there was not enough food. We just ate what they served us. And one thing that was served was ves. Les ves. Anyone is speaking French here? Outside of those two? You know what ves are? Okay, in French. Wrong pen. Les ves. Okay. I had to look it up in the dictionary because I didn't know what it was. Okay, that's okay, Sylvia, thank you. Les ves are actually not a lentil, but it is a dry seed like that. And Mother describes in her memoirs, she describes how she would cook les ves and they boiled and boiled and boiled and boiled and boiled and boiled. And it was still hard to eat, but it was proteins, you know, it was beans. And so she would put a spoonful on the plate and it would go bing, 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 because they never got soft. They were always like, you know, they bounced around. And we ate ves like nobody's business. We thought it was good, you know. And Madame Berthe ended up never telling us that she had a son in the village, hidden in another home. That's how secret it was. And she ended up coming to New York after the war with her son, and he found a job, and she found a job too, and they had a very comfortable end of life there. So, you know, it was a success story, as opposed to Monsieur Collin, who is a lonely guy, was a lonely guy. Question?
What do you remember about school at that time, and how, you know, when new kids would come in, how teachers handle it? What do you remember about that?
This is an American immigration problem. It was not a French wartime problem. Kids appeared in school and disappeared. Kids appeared with French names, false papers, and thick accents. Never were any questions asked. Never did we ask them, you know, where do you come from, or why do you have a funny accent? Or the teachers just taught French. It was total immersion, and it was real total immersion, and it was successful. when I see in St. Paul, you know, we have all, for instance, all the Mexicans, all the exceptions they make in schools to help those poor Mexican kids who don't speak English. Ridiculous. Dump them in an American school and let them learn English. In 1 year, they would speak English. No, it's just complicated committees to solve problems. No, it was total immersion. Nobody asked anything. It was secret. Nobody knew what the others were doing. Yes?
What was the main focus of education back then, like the main subjects?
Education, it was just to pass your exams. We had exams, and we had to pass those exams in order to, for instance, when the new school was created, they were preparing for what they call in France the baccalaureate, which is a state exam. So we had to go through the curriculum that led to that state exam. And if you passed, you were in Fat City because you could make it in the university. If you didn't, you could try again another year. In the fall, there was a fall makeup. So it was just, the aim of education was to cover a certain curriculum, which was rather sophisticated. It was not a technical school type curriculum. And when I correspond with friends who went to the public school with me, elementary public school, and I see their perfect French grammar and their beautiful penmanship when they stopped their education at age 16, it was superb education. Superb education. They couldn't play with computers or with a little crazy machine, you know. No, they were not distracted. There was very little distraction. So it was such a natural thing.
Spoken as a true French person, proud of the French education system. That's for sure.
It's very difficult, and the university is very difficult. Yeah. That's why I stayed in the States.
I'm going to let us close out, and if you'd like to continue to have conversation or questions, I'm sure, Nellie, you're welcome to.
Yeah,
willing to stay.
you can ask me what you want, and do browse through the book
But I want to make
table.
sure that we end in a timely way. If you'd like to get a book, if you'd like to stay, please feel free to. But
Yeah,
thank you.
and if you'd like Patrick Henry to sign his book, if you're interested, otherwise go to the library.
Yeah. So thank you, Nellie.
You're welcome.